About 15 years ago, I was appointed to be the lead pastor of a church that I knew rather well. See, I had been the associate pastor in that church when I first started ministry. Usually you don't go back when you've been a pastor and an associate to be coming back to be the lead pastor, but I guess they found the exception to that rule, and I was sent back to the church. Though it had been 14 years since I was last there, many of the people were the same. The church, like any other church, had experienced moments or periods of great increase and growth, but also some periods of decline. They had added a whole new building, a discipleship center. Since the last time I was there, they had renewed their youth rooms to the point that it truly was transformative for the youth. Not only did I know many of the people, but I had also been loosely keeping up with their story. And one thing I knew about them when I was associate, and one thing I knew prior to becoming their lead pastor, was that debt was part of their story, a consistent part of their story. Even with significant debt, they took on more debt. It was a heavy burden on a church that had experienced some years of decline in attendance. And that church was facing deferred maintenance and also significant debt, in addition to just the normal general expenses of what it takes to be a large church. And to move forward, they needed to do the equivalent of a building refresh, what we did several years ago at Great Bridge. But they also needed to get out from that weight, from that burden of debt, so that they could be freer to be in the church that God was calling them to be. So they could do more in ministry, as more funding was for that, as opposed to debt. And so I knew I needed help, because I had never taken on the task of leading a church during a capital campaign. I'd done stewardship campaigns before, but never something like this. We're asking people to give a substantial amount to get rid of debt. And so we invited a stewardship company to come and lead a campaign. And this required us to put some teams in place and to follow a paradigm, to follow an outline. And so we followed all that they suggested, and we raised funds. People gave in wonderful ways. Members who attended the different services would come together for neighborhood gatherings and learning that they actually attended the same church. A great deal of momentum had been generated. I'm thankful that they had sent that consultant to come and work with church leaders and to coach me along the way. As I look back on that experience, the key takeaway was not the importance of having youth involved and having children involved, though there's great value in teaching the lessons of generosity to young kids. And they had these little churches that were like piggy banks where they would put in coins and small bills as a way of encouraging being part of this. And that act of bringing those little churches up, was a source of encouragement for the adults who were there. Hearing stories about how the church through the years had meant so many wonderful things for all the members, and what an impact the worship and the mission and the music and the service the mission had on the people. And lives were transformed because of the ministry. The key takeaway wasn't in those neighborhood gatherings or having a grand celebration event, or in even hearing the total amount pledged by the financial leaders. No, the key part of that whole campaign centered around a simple prayer. Lord, what do you want to do through me? Lord, what do you want to do through me? At the beginning of that experience, I was given a 3-ring binder that was about that thick, and I opened it up, and there's a timeline, and I see that prayer. And then I go through the different sections, and there it is, that prayer over and over again. And the consultant, every time he would come up from Atlanta, he'd offer this prayer to our church over the span of 6 to 7 months. I mean, there's that 6, 7 right there. I mean, I'm writing this out, and I had to double check, was it really 6, 7 months? And it was 6 to 7 months. And my first thought was, this is all you've got? This This prayer, that's what you're giving us? Everything hangs on this prayer? This is why we're paying you the big bucks to come up from Atlanta so you can offer this simple prayer over and over again? It seems so simple. 9-word prayers seemed to me unnecessary given the grand scheme of what we were trying to accomplish. My thought was, let the people come up with their own prayers and they'll make up their own minds and how they want to be involved. And yet without this prayer, without members sincerely praying this prayer and actually taking time to listen to what God was saying or sense what God was calling them to do, we would have just gone through the motion step by step and hit not even perhaps the first benchmark. A very low number of giving and a low number of participation. When offering this simple prayer in life, we find that such a prayer, it's not about maintaining the status quo. When we offer that prayer, we offer it not just during a generosity campaign. We should offer that in lots of different areas of our life. Think about our relationships, what could happen if we say, Lord, what do you want to do through me in this relationship? What is required of me? Is it to be more loving? Is it to be more forgiving, to extend grace? What is it? Lord, what do you want to do through me? New beginnings and restoration in relationships can take place when people offer this prayer asking what God would have us do. It's not ever about being comfortable with our lot in life. It's about going where God would call us to go and to do the very things God is calling us to do and to be the very people, the very church that God is calling us to be. Collectively as a church, yes, but also as individuals in the life of the church. To pray this kind of prayer is in keeping with Paul's encouragement to the church of Ephesus when he writes, I pray that God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation as you come to know him, so that with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you may know what is the hope to which he has called you. In this act of praying in this way, Lord, what do you want to do through me? We are becoming very vulnerable. We are placing ourselves to the possibilities, being open to the possibilities of what could be should God work through us, and we're willing to be so open to God. We're open then to be enlightened. However, this prayer should come with a warning. And I looked in that book, there was no warning. There was no warning that came with that prayer. The reason why it should come to be with a warning is it may require something of us, something new from us, something that we may not have ever thought about doing. And also might put us then on an exciting journey of growth in our walk with Jesus, growth in our understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, growth that comes when we not only pray this prayer with regularity, but with regularity we're open to listening and sensing what God is calling us to do, and we discover what that calling is, and then we have the courage to live it out. Though we are not in the midst of a capital campaign and we are not, thankfully, facing a $1 million debt. This is the first church I've been in years that didn't have $1 million+ in debt. But such a prayer is needed as we consider not only who we are as a church today, but who we can be. Who we can be as we live out such a prayer. Lord, what do you want to do through me? And when we offer that prayer, it's not just the prayer of the church, and let the church, let the leaders pray that prayer. No, it's about all of us offering that prayer. It makes it personal because we're asking God, Lord, what can you do through me? It's not about others having the ability to offer that prayer. See, when the Lord works in and through the life of the church, God is working through whom? You. Through all of us, all of the people. And so such work is never limited to church leaders or clergy or those who've been here the longest or those who are here who are the newest. Such work is not limited to seasoned Christians, but God is also at work among those who are stepping out in faith for the very first time. And so no matter where we are along that spectrum, we're in the church and we find ourselves in the best position to live out our membership vows of offering our prayers, our presence, our gifts, and our service and witness when we adopt that attitude or that posture of prayerful willingness. And it takes courage then to not only say this prayer, which is an act of surrender, but it also takes courage to live it out. But when we do, or should I say, as we are living this out, we are finding our true home. We're finding greater joy in life. And we begin to live in such a way that we're created to live as God's beloved children, reflecting the love of God through all of who we are. In the stewardship campaign, our focus is on generosity, but we're not just talking about money. I hope if this is your first Sunday here, I hope you don't leave, all that church has ever talk about is money. I mean, even as we're talking about it, we're not talking about it. We're talking about generosity. It extends beyond dollars here. And yet I recognize we're only able to be in ministry through the generosity of so many people in the life of the church. I recognize that every dollar given is because someone has made the decision to give it to God for God to use through the ministry of the church. And for a church to be a ministry that transforms lives and transforms a community requires us to be generous with our time, with our talents, and our resources. As I stand here and I preach this sermon, I recognize there's already a high level of commitment, and people are generous here at Great Bridge United Methodist Church. But I've also come to recognize through the years that generosity begets generosity. And so what do? We need to talk about it. We need to celebrate when we see it, and when we experience it as well. We need to consider generosity as a challenge as we encourage one another to be exceedingly generous. And so generosity, as I mentioned earlier, is not limited to finances. It can be seen and experienced when it comes to kindness, with loving one another in the way that Jesus would have us love one another. And the more generous we are with our time and talents and resources, the more our joy increases. And with every generous act, we are making an investment in God's kingdom work through the ministry here at Great Bridge United Methodist Church. And when we see people who are generous with their time in serving others, that does what? It encourages others to become involved as well. This serves as an encouragement for others to take part. I see that with agape ministry, the food ministry, the bringing of the cans. That's an act of generosity that's shared, extend beyond our walls to help those in need. I see it as more and more people are signing up and being part of that ministry. When we see generosity of resources, that encourages more generosity, especially when we have goals in mind. And so, yes, we do have a need, and I need to speak to that need. We do have a need to satisfy our mortgage that is due in March of next year. We currently owe between $60,000 and $70,000, and we've watched that figure in the last year come down rather significantly. On January 1, it was over $200,000. And the reason why it's come down, one, we've raised the awareness. But it's also come down when we've seen generosity of so many through the months. And that number has become lower and lower. And now the goal is well within reach. And so the challenge before us is to eliminate this debt, so that we can be freer in ministry in the upcoming year. Think about what could happen if we transfer money toward debt, toward more in mission, as we seek to be more fully church, free from that debt. We're not seeking pledges. Then that was something that we sought years ago, and people have been faithful to that. We're no longer seeking pledges to Building Bridges 2. Rather, we are seeking gifts, year-end gifts that could help us move forward in ministry. So I invite us to pray the prayer when it comes to supporting the church with our prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness, and when it means to consider how collectively we can achieve that goal, as well as provide for ministry for the church in the upcoming year. So spend time this week offering that prayer of surrender. Lord, what do you want to do through me? And then in an act of worship, offer that commitment to God, asking God to guide us to fulfill and to live into the prayer that we offer in the upcoming year. This stewardship series is entitled The Generosity Challenge, because being generous is a challenge in our culture that encourages the individual pursuit of happiness. It encourages individualism, where the individual is king, the individual is queen. It's all about self-advancement and self-preservation. It's a challenge when we live in a culture that promotes fear. And if we have that mindset, it'll lead to a scarcity mindset, thinking that we will never have enough. And if that's the mindset that we have adopted and live by, we will never be generous as we could be or would want to be, because that scarcity mindset can carry us and therefore limit us. Generosity is a challenge for us because every day we live with that constant sickness of affluenza in our culture. Affluenza is the unhealthy and unwelcome psychological and social effects of affluence, regarded especially as a widespread and societal problem. Such an extreme materialism and consumerism associates with the pursuit of wealth and success, and resulting in a life of chronic dissatisfaction and debt and overworked and stress and impaired relationships. You know, our American culture places a great value on affluence. Being affluent seems to be greater goal than being kind and empathetic and compassionate toward one another. Our economy depends on all the money spent when? During Christmas. Jesus must be so honored. Jesus must be so honored how much we celebrate his birthday with all of our overspending, when generosity of the season could be lived out so differently, and with even greater joy in giving food to the hungry. Giving funds for building supplies through the upcoming Advent offering. We're going to hear more about that later, but our Advent offering will support FaithWorks, which is a local ministry that helps people have homes that are safe, warm, and dry. We've been so conditioned to grab and to take hold of what can be ours, rather than loosening our grip on that which actually has a grip on us, controlling us. And yet, as we were reminded in our first sermon on the series, we were born to be generous. For we are children of God, made in the very image of God. And throughout the Scriptures, and especially in the life of Jesus, we see that our God is exceedingly generous. And there is no way we could ever outgive God. But don't let that be your excuse. That should not be our excuse not to try. But if we're going to live a life of generosity, we need a way to recover that part of our lives so that we are reflecting God's generous spirit in the way that we live, in the way that we love, in the way that we treat others, in the way that we live out that greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all of who we are, and to love our neighbors that we have from God. During this generosity challenge, we are sharing how we become generous people. God has called us to be when we are grounded in gratitude, and then stewardship is revealed through prayer. And then it is lived or sealed in faith. Last week, our focus was the importance of being grounded in gratitude. Today, we're looking at the importance of prayer. Scott McKenzie, in his book, Generosity Rising, states that gratitude combined with prayer is radical and life-changing. Gratitude and prayer completely reorients our lives from self-centered to God-centered, to kingdom-centered. And in the spirituality of fundraising, Nowin writes, prayer is the radical starting point of fundraising, because in prayer we slowly experience a reorientation of all of our thoughts and feelings about ourselves and others. In the Scriptures, we see time and again how people of God embrace the prayerful willingness to do what God was calling them to do. As we move into Advent, we're going to see that, we're going to hear that in the experience of Mary. Let it be. In the book of Exodus, Moses had fled from seeing his people enslaved, fled for his own life. And there out in the wilderness, God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. And at first he wanted to turn away, for he knew something was up. And not every day a voice is coming from a bush that's not being consumed, that's burning. And from that bush, the voice of God called out to Moses. For God wanted Moses to go back to lead the people out of Egypt. As we listen to that story, Moses offers some excuses as to why he was most unqualified. But he eventually had a prayerful willingness to respond to God's call on his life. On the night in which Jesus was betrayed, he prayed in the garden that the suffering and death would not be his, but would be taken from him. But in that prayer, as he's talking to God the Father, in that prayer in the garden, that prayer does what toward the end? It yields. As Jesus says, not my will, but your will be done. And that too is an act of prayerful willingness, and the mighty acts of Jesus from the cross to resurrection forever changed the world. Now I realize there's always the risk of drawing examples from the Scriptures where we look up to Mary, we look up to Moses, we look up to Jesus and say, but we can never be so willing. Or whatever I do, whatever God is calling me to do, it cannot really have that much of an impact. And yet we're called to have the same prayerful willingness as we live in our day and time, as we seek to be church here at Great Bridge. See, great things happen. Great things happen in our lives, in the life of the church, when we as ordinary people in a very ordinary faith community willingly and prayerfully place ourselves in the hands of our extraordinary God. And so much can be revealed when we can pray, Lord, what do you want to do through our church? Lord, what do you want to do through me? And then we're to take the time, because it's not going to happen overnight. Take the time to listen and discern. And then have the courage to respond. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.